Good afternoon. My name is Dakota, and today I'm going to be talking to you about the three strikes laws and how they affect Colorado. I'm going to briefly explain the history of these laws, the uses of these laws, the controversy surrounding these laws, and in conclusion, what Colorado should do in regards to these laws. The first ever example of a three-strike law took place in Texas in 1974, when the Texas courts convicted a man for the third time of a felony. This automatically led to a life imprisonment for this gentleman. However, the first true three strikes law was passed in 1993 in Washington state, when voters approved an initiative called 593. California passed its own in 1994 called Proposition 184 by an overwhelming majority, nearly 75% of the voters. The initiative proposed would allow what was called three strikes and you're out to give a life imprisonment sentence to a convicted criminal of 3 violent or serious felonies. The use of these laws is very straightforward. The idea being that the laws were to stop crime and prevent recidivism in career criminals by incapacitating them through the use of our prison system. The next obvious question is, who do these laws affect? The first one is obvious. Criminals, as the criminals are the ones who will be facing the hammer of justice and the three strikes laws. These laws will incapacitate criminals for a minimum of 20 years without parole. The second group of people that are affected by these laws are the taxpayers. This is the less obvious answer, as we are forced to begin paying for the higher prison population needs. However, you won't see any of that on a bill as these laws are passed. However, we also theoretically should see a drop in criminal activity and all-around safer neighborhoods due to the application of these laws. These laws, however, have not gone without controversy of their own. The controversy began primarily in California, when in 2002, Kathleen Arhan published an article entitled Selective Incapacitation, Three Strikes and the Problem of Aging Prison Population, using simulation modeling to see the future. This simulation model, as seen on the right-hand side at the moment, correctly predicted that within 30 years the prison population would double. This would lead to prison overpopulation and massive amounts of money being needed to run these prisons. Healthcare, as an example, would steadily increase as not only more people enter prison, but inmates as they get older would also need more and more medical attention. This, of course, greatly concerned researchers at the time, and unfortunately their worries seem to have been well-founded, as the cost to run prisons has dramatically increased over the years. It is really quite staggering that even 10 years ago, 12 years ago, these researchers foresaw what the future would hold for these prisons and the taxpayers. However, in 2005, Brown and Jolivet published a primer entitled Three Strikes, the Impact After More Than a Decade. This consolidated all the information that California had on these laws and the prisons, attempting to answer the question, are these laws effective? The data shows that while the laws are effective, the amount of money that is required to run them is massive. This is essentially the root of the controversy. Can we sacrifice more money for the sake of having safer streets? This leads us to our next slide, which is the pros of having such laws. In 1998, Barris and Griffith attempted to answer the question nearly 4 years after the laws were implemented. Do the three strike laws make sense? Habitual offender statutes and criminal incapacitation. Their conclusion was that yes, the laws made sense. They incapacitated criminals and prevented crime on the streets. Once again, referring to Brown and Jolivet in 2005, a primary three strikes, the impact after more than a decade, the data after nearly a decade shows that the amount of crimes in California was nearly halved. Surely this data offers the most convincing of arguments for the existence of these laws. Also, the amount of money to constantly be prosecuting these offenders would drop due to the fact that the lengthy trials are not required for any subsequent crimes, because there would be no subsequent crimes. As far as taxpayers go, the obvious boost in safety is immeasurable. Nothing can compare to the feeling of having a safe neighborhood or a street where your kids can play on. These graphs show absolute evidence, indisputable evidence, as to the effectiveness of these laws. The left graph shows that those being put into prisons typically had a much larger offense or prior offense rap sheet than those not convicted with three strikes laws. The graph on the right shows that after the implication of the three strikes laws in California, the crime in those cities nearly halved, making for a much safer neighborhood and better place to live. However, many people dispute whether these laws should actually be in place. The cons are also pretty obvious. Massive sentences for petty crimes, targeted sentencing makes for unequal rulings, and the taxpayers have to pay massive amounts of taxes to keep up with the prison population. The sentencing that is handed down for a crime simply due to the existence of the three strikes laws is massive. A simple crime instantly becomes so much larger due to the fact that they will now receive a minimum sentence of several decades. This is a terrifying notion. Also, the inequality of these sentences is blatantly obvious. Instead of a fair and impartial system, we now have a system that targets specific people and punishes them differently to the other criminals. The prison system is also another issue. Kathleen Arahan in 2002, once again, also foresaw the future and knew that the aging prison population and the increase of people in those prisons would lead to massive budget issues. On the left, we can see the dramatic increase in prison populations over the years, over 10 years, during the Three Strikes initiative. However, another issue seems to have presented itself that greatly favors those who oppose the Three Strikes laws. In 2003, a study was run in California to determine whether or not the Three Strikes laws were effective. The yellow bars represent 1994, and the blue bars represent 2003. Now, these bars show that there was also a dramatic decrease in crime in counties that did not have the Three Strikes laws. Does this mean that the Three Strikes laws are effective? Many people would argue that this proves that they are not. However, the argument can also be made that career criminals were committing crimes in all of these other subsequent cities, and when they were convicted on a Three Strikes law, the crime dropped in those other cities because the career criminals were not committing crimes in those cities. In conclusion, the act of writing a bill that abolished the Three Strikes laws would be to take a very unnecessary gamble. Why would we risk not only our safety but our children's safety by not locking up and punishing the criminals that have committed such violent and heinous crimes that would lead to the enactment of the Three Strikes laws? Again, these laws have been proven in not only the studies that I mentioned, but in countless others to reduce crime and increase public safety. The amount of crimes that are perpetrated in a given city that has the Three Strikes laws has dropped significantly since the institution of. Also, the argument that the increase in costs of the prisons and the increasing burden on taxpayers to pay these costs is really invalid. The knowledge that your children can walk the streets and feel safe is invaluable. It is immeasurable. The small increase in taxes would greatly benefit all of those who want safer streets. So when people need to vote on this issue, they aren't going to be voting with their wallets. They're going to be voting with the statistics and the data. They are going to look at the safer streets and the decrease in crime and understand that it is worth the increase in paying taxes. Thank you. I hope you enjoyed my presentation.